So welcome everyone to another Change Your Game with GTD podcast. My name is Robert Peake and I'm here with Todd Brown.
Hello, Robert. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Todd. So we were talking briefly about what we should talk about, as we often do, just before these podcasts. And so I was talking a little bit about, well, I'll let you speak for yourself, but just this idea that, GTD can help you when you're at the end of a long week. It's Friday here, and we're all kind of back into the swing of things after the holidays and, cranking away. And so just that idea that you're not necessarily, your best changes, I guess, that you're not always, at this incredibly high state of sharp and able and raring to go, but that GTD works in that place too. So Todd, do you want to kick off with a little more about that? I thought that was really an interesting observation.
Yeah, I think what I keep getting drawn back to is this idea that when we decide what to do, there are a number of things that have an impact on a good decision, right? What to choose to focus on. And so the example that I'll sometimes quote in one of my seminars will be, hey, it's the end of a long day. I say it's the end of a seminar day, let's say, right? And seminars, I don't do a huge number of them these days, but the ones that I do, seminars take a lot out of me. I love the work. I absolutely groove on it. I absolutely enjoy it. But it's also, me on for 8 hours, right? Which takes a lot of energy. And so at the end of a seminar day, one of the things that I've come to realize over the years is that I am just not in a mental state to do any kind of, let's call it mental heavy lifting, right? So it's in those situations where I just need to be sensitive to that and realize, well, if one of the things that I have on one of my next actions lists is I need to do a bit of a brainstorm on a strategy for a new approach to this client, that's probably not the right time to do it. So I think there's a sensitivity and a self-awareness there to the idea that we're not always high performers, and what's appropriate for us to focus on is going to depend on, among other things. Again, in one of the models we introduced, we talk about the fact that what context you're in has an impact on what you choose to do, right? Like, where am I? What tools do I have to hand? Today, I'm working from my home office. Regardless of whether, as I'm deciding what to do, choosing something off of my office list, that is the things I can only do at the office, it's not going to help. So context is one thing. Time available is something else we consider. And then we have this idea of energy levels, which is, I think, kind of what we're talking about here. It's an appreciation of how sharp am I feeling, how kind of up for kind of deep thought do I feel at the moment. And as you say, it's now, what is it here? It's 4:15 on a Friday afternoon. I've been hard at it. For pretty much the whole day, and it's timely. It's timely. I'm hoping that I'm stringing complete sentences together here. You're gonna have to back me up.
So far, so good. Yeah, so far. We'll
Glad to
see
hear
how
it.
we'll see how as the podcast wears on. How you do. But yeah, if you're not off, I'll yell or something. I'll shout.
Thank you.
No, I completely agree. And I love that quote from David, that part of being high performance as an individual is recognizing you aren't always high performance. So how do you deal with what's real? You talked I think a lot about awareness, and rightly so, because at the higher level game, to me, GTD is an awareness process, right? And it's awareness of how you work that helps you to sort of work smarter and better. But it also, I think, helps you to recover smarter and better, helps you to enjoy things smarter and better, enjoy your life smarter and better. And I think there's a couple of things for me that really kind of stand out about the system in particular, in relation to, if you kind of buy this idea, this sort of I think it's Carlos Castaneda, 4 agreements idea, that you want to do your personal best, but your personal best changes, right, based on how you're actually doing. The simple example, when everyone recognizes when they're ill, that they can't do as much as when they're healthy. And for me, the more I invest in and get sharp at and make habitual thinking about my future self in relation to stating those actions very clearly, very simply, and very much in terms of what it looks like to get started, the better a chance I have when I'm like you, kind of at the end of a busy patch, to still engage with those lists and do what's appropriate to my energy level. And there's just a nice feeling, I think, about that, to say, look, I don't have to just do absolutely nothing. And sometimes you do, and sometimes that's appropriate. And it's great to have bookmarks in place that you can just step away completely. But sometimes, it's useful to be able to say, look, I'm doing what I can. And I know that. I recognize that. I trust that, that I'm doing my bit. I'm doing my personal best. And you can see that through an externalized system, that you are ticking off those things that you can do in that moment, that you can keep ticking over, or you're using what kind of remaining little energy you have before you really need to disconnect for a weekend and rest, to focus on the most important things, on the things that really matter. And then you kind of are making negotiations with yourself, like, look, really need to do this, really need to get through this thing. um, and we know it's the right thing to do, and once we're done, downtime. So
Mhm.
to me, that system facilitates that in a whole different way than the kind of, oh, hope it's right, not really sure, go, working from home, go downstairs and see if there's any more cheese in the fridge, and the kind of less productive behaviors that creep in when you're not really sure what your options are. So to me, that was one of the big keys, I think, to recovering well and being productive in ways that are appropriate when you're not on your A game, which is not always.
Yeah, I think, as you're talking about it, what's occurring to me is that I think, of course, this is very personal, and how one of the things that's always fascinated me about GTD is that it supports you regardless of how high you set your standards in terms of your own productivity, right? So, I think about the people that we've worked with over the years who are just, they are giving in many cases, their professional lives huge focus, getting an enormous amount done. GTD helps them to make sure that they're being as productive as they possibly can be. The boss notices, they get promoted, I mean, and that's what they want to do. And GTD absolutely supports them in that. And I think at the other end of the spectrum, GTD, if you are so minded, GTD helps you to explore the limits of your own laziness, right? In other words, how lazy can I be without getting fired, right? And if you're motivated more in that direction, then GTD can also provide you with the support for that. So it's always something that's been, for me, I think, fascinating, and I think surprising to a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years, that we don't make sort of any going in assumptions about how productive you want to be, how much of your life do you want to focus on, your professional work, as it were? How much, are you looking to create more space with your friends and family? If so, great. Are you looking to get, 20% more done at the office so the boss notices and you get that big job? Great, right? We can help you either way. Um, and I think, again, people who come into our world and take part in the seminars or the coaching, quite often I think they come in with this assumption that what we want for them is that they will be as productive professionally as they can be, right? The company has paid for this seminar. The company wants me to work harder. The company wants me to get more done. And, of course, all companies want to get the most out of their people. But at the same time, when it comes to the work, ultimately it's going to be the individual that's driving what, their own standards are going to set what productive enough looks like, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a really, really good point. That productivity isn't this objective thing that's the same for everyone, and it's really, in terms of, as you said, standards, or this idea of personal best. It's not the same even for one person, moment to moment, right? It's
Mm.
it's going it's going to vary. And as you so well put, I think, one of the wonderful things to me about GTD is it meets you where you are. It meets you where you are, and it helps you move to kind of where you want to be in relation to that. And one of the factors, we talk about this in the seminar in terms of just the psychological game of managing your commitments. One of the big things to me, well, what prompted it, weirdly enough, I'm such an associative person, is I'm today drinking out of one of my favorite mugs. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it says, "I work hard so my cat can have a better life." And I love it because what it reminds me is that, in a way, if you don't appreciate yourself for some of these things that you do that are, within your integrity, part of your personal best, that won't necessarily be highly recognized by others. Your cat certainly won't, right? Your cat your cat's just gonna, want the better food all the time and whatever else. So there is something about managing your commitments and ticking things off and seeing that you've done that and being able at the end of a day to say, I did a good day. I was a little tired, I was a little subpar, whatever today, but I did an appropriate day for where I was at and what was true for me. And then on other days when you're just firing on all cylinders, you go, whoa, I did a good day. Given that I was really energized, really, raring to go, I did a good day for that. So
Mm.
that element of appreciation, that kind of feedback loop that happens when you just tick stuff off and go, yay, did it, right? And move on to the next. To me is a big factor in, yeah, in I guess what I'd call the integrity of maintaining your personal best, whether or not the external circumstances always recognize that.
I
Mm.
think probably the people that came up with your mug had no idea the depth of thinking that could have laid behind that phrase. Um, yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's a very personal consideration. It's one of the things that we want to help people to get clear on is what does good enough look like for me, right? And it's funny. I was reading something recently about what seems to be a trend uh, in the workplace. As I read the article, especially amongst folks who are entering the workplace, millennials and the generation after them. And again, I don't know any reason why this would be specific to that generation, but the phrase that was used to describe it is "rise and grind," and the idea is that what you're doing is dedicating as much energy as possible to your job. And it took me back. I was reflecting on the fact that back in the .com days, I remember vividly reading an article. It was an interview with somebody who was starting a .com or was involved in a startup, and and he described his family, his wife and his children as basically as sources of friction, as things that that kept him from getting done the things that he wanted to get done. I found that, as you might imagine, a little interesting in terms of life choices. But I mean, kind of going back to it, I think there is in any culture, corporate culture, national culture, I think there's going to be there will be people who are saying, hey, I really am about achievement in the professional sphere. That's what drives me. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's where I want to put my energy. And I don't want to, I don't want to say to that person, no, that's wrong. You need to spend more time with your family. That's ultimately a decision that they need to make. I think for a lot of people, that said, what's excuse me, what's quite interesting is that some people don't realize that there is a balance to be had between between professional achievement and personal satisfaction, right? So if we make just to put sort of top line numbers on, if we make somebody 15% more productive, right, well, that's the better part of a chunk a day in a standard work week, right? So then all of a sudden we're asking the question, okay, well, let's say we freed up 6 hours in a week for you. What are you going to do with those 6 hours? You're going to go home early? You're going to, keeping in mind you will get done as much as you got done before, right? Because you're more efficient. What are you going to do with that extra time? And I think, again, whenever that question comes up, whether it's in a seminar or coaching, I just love that question. Just seeing what people say, because I'm not going to try to um, enforce motivation. That's wrong. That's ultimately down to the individual.
Have you ever seen people be afraid of the extra time? Have you ever seen that next thing where people kind of go, I don't know what I'd do if I wasn't just busy, busy, busy. 'Cause
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
This happened I was watching somebody else do a seminar with my master trainer hat on the other day, and this person was as distracted. I mean, taking phone calls in the seminar. We had to ask her, of course, to step out. She was, she was checking emails the whole time. She was not in the room in all kind of practical ways. And so, we had a quiet word with her at one of the breaks, and she didn't say it in so many words, but basically her own what seemed to be the case was that her own value, her own worth was tied up in being busy. That was the most important thing, right? And what was frustrating for me about that was not that she, didn't completely embrace GTD, but more just that what she seemed to be missing there was that she was letting the world, right, all of these individual interactions drive her. So she was reacting to every email as it arrived. She was, texting. I don't even know, but she was using her mobile device an awful lot during the seminar. And the question which I did ask her, and she wasn't really ready for this question, but I said to her, come the end of a day, do you generally have the sense that given the big picture, you focused on the right things? And her answer was pretty much, well, I don't need to worry about the big picture because the world keeps me as busy as I want to be.
Wow, very interesting response. Wow. Yeah, and as you're talking, I'm thinking that whether your motto is, rise and grind, which I think really should only apply to baristas, but that's a personal value judgment there that
Nicely done.
that I should withhold. So we can edit that out, or maybe not. But whatever your value system, whatever your standards, whatever you believe about yourself as human beings, there's some fundamental things that we come across. And not to totally bum out the mood here, but I will. I mean, we all will at some point experience bereavements of some kind, right? Whether it's losing a loved one, or a divorce is a kind of bereavement. Illness was short term, but for some people longer term, illness, or even chronic situations. And what's amazing again to me about GTD is I've worked with people, and experienced GTD help in all of those situations. I've experienced GTD create a sense of, connection to being able to, carry on and maintain some positive, productive engagement with the world in very intense emotional and physical circumstances. Right. And like I said, the world's kind of, in my world, somewhat divided into those who have suffered, and those who haven't yet. Right. Again, not to totally depress everyone, but in a way, because GTD can meet you where you are, that game of the busy, busy, busy trap. In my experience, at some point the music's going to stop there. And then it's like, well, what have you built to sustain yourself through tougher times? And for me, I can say, having an ingrained habit of being able to think about my future self and define what I need to do, and then having that other ingrained habit of going and picking off the things that are appropriate to do to engage, can just really make a huge difference, in one's life and in one's well-being, psychologically, and even physically. Just feeling like you can carry on in a productive way, can have a huge effect. Can have a huge effect in tough times. And I hate to say it, but some some level of tough times, I don't think anyone's is exempt from. So,
Mm-hmm. So, so maybe if we could kind of, I'm just, the umbrella idea here, right, was that there's this idea of being, being sensitive to, being kind of self-aware about the fact that we are not always at our at our productive best. That's in some ways that's sort of the wrong way to put it. You sort of you do the best you can with the situation that you're in, right? Whether that's your energy level or your context or whatever, whatever the criteria are that are determining what to focus on. So if we were going to kind of boil this down and sort of say to people, okay, well, here are your top takeaways from this in terms of what you recommend that they implement and how they work. What would you what kind of guidance would you give them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think, you were talking about how do we define this term of, to me, there's an unreasonable ideal. That's what I would call it, an unreasonable ideal that doesn't match the circumstances sometimes of what's true for you. So getting real about what is, to me, is a lot of what GTD is about. Getting a complete current inventory, just of projects and actions, just starting there, even if you haven't processed every email out of your inbox, but at least creating some focus in that way, putting a kind of stake in the ground. Again, to me, one of the things it creates is an externalized mechanism to be able to see yourself succeeding, ticking things off, getting stuff done. Um, and then being able to acknowledge, hey, I got stuff done today. I may not have met some ideal, but that ideal may not have been realistic to the circumstances of the day either, right? I was in back to backs, but I made good use of my 15-minute breaks, or whatever. Or I had a stonking head cold, and I made reasonable use of the day anyway, or season that one to taste. But yeah, for me, the acknowledgement cycle in GTD is a huge part of knowing, am I giving it my personal best, or am I holding out an unreasonable standard, or am I kind of just slacking off?
Mm.
What about you? What are some of your kind of takeaways you'd want people to take from this?
Yeah, it's again, I think it is a fascinating area of personal exploration for a lot of people. And I think um, asking yourself some, just riffing on what you were just saying, I think it would be interesting for people to think about when are they generally in the course of their day or their week, just pay attention to when do you think you're kind of generally at your mental, in your mental optimal state. When are you in this just kind of, oh boy, I've got two brain cells left to rub together, and that's kind of it, right? So I want to have, I want to be clear about in a general week, not of course that you then don't, you put that in a spreadsheet and then you never vary from it, but just kind of generally, and over time starting to try to align the type of activity that you choose to engage in with what your energy levels seem to be, right? So do a little bit of kind of forward planning around all that, and modify, as time goes by, as seems appropriate. Um, and I think it's interesting. I when I was in my career back when I was working in large corporates, I think I used to beat myself up a lot for not engaging in things which, in retrospect, were not things that in the state that I was in, there was any productive way for me to really engage in. Right. And so one of the things that I've taken away from that is that I've stopped beating myself up, and that's quite positive. It doesn't mean that those things don't get done, but it just means that I don't have this sense that, everything important in my life should all be focused on at the same time, which is, of course, I know if not a conscious thought, then probably a subconscious thought that an awful lot of people have, some subconscious sense that a lot of people have is, there are all of these things that have piled up in my life, and I should be doing them all right now, right? And so I think, again, whether your standards are, I want to set the world on fire, and I want to, found the next greatest company, and from a corporate point of view, or from from an organizational point of view, make something happen. Great. And also for those folks who just want to, see their kids at bedtime every evening. Uh, we've got something, the methodology certainly has something to help folks who make those kinds of life choices, and really anything in between.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we've seen it, we've experienced it, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback as well. I think this is probably a good place to kind of wrap up, and just say, if you do have thoughts, questions, anything that this has sparked or provoked or prompted, or suggestions for future episodes, things that you might want us to cover. info@next-action.eu, info@next-action.eu. Drop us an email. We're always happy to hear from you. Meanwhile, from Todd, from me, thanks for tuning into this. Go and hopefully get real, be kind to yourself, and use GTD wherever you find yourself to be more productive and hopefully more happy. Do that, and we'll see you next time.